If this story resonated with you, I invite you to support me by sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your encouragement means the world, and hearing your experiences reminds me, and everyone watching, that we're not alone in facing workplace challenges. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or erased, please let me know. Your story could inspire others who are struggling silently right now. Remember, life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes being pushed aside feels like the end of the road, but it can also be a quiet invitation to realign your path on your own terms. My experience taught me that strength isn't always loud or confrontational. It can be calm, calculated, and full of patience. If you're going through tough times at work or anywhere else in life, don't lose sight of your value. Keep sharpening your skills, stay true to your principle. Effective immediately, your salary will be reduced by 45%, and your new role will be assistant to Mr. Ryan Delaney. That sentence split the room like a scalpel. The hum of the overhead fluorescents filled the void that followed. I didn't blink, just shifted my gaze between the two faces seated across the table, Thomas Vance, our newly installed CEO at Fairgrove Technologies in Seattle, and Dana from HR, whose expression said she wanted to be anywhere else. I didn't ask questions. I didn't protest. Not because I agreed, but because I knew myself. If I opened my mouth, the dam would break. A dam built over 21 years of quiet competence, of taking on reorgs, cover-ups, strategic pivots that were nothing more than power plays. Ryan Delaney, age 27, the CEO's only son, fresh out of an online master's program and 2 weeks into his executive integration period. I'd trained interns with sharper judgment and Uber drivers with better discretion. And now I was expected to be his assistant? After over 2 decades as Fairgrove's director of regulatory audits? After designing the internal controls that kept us out of federal investigations? Twice? This wasn't about capability. This was erasure by protocol. I left the room without a word. Not out of acceptance, but because silence buys you time. That night, at 11:48 p.m., I sat in my home office, logged in through a private proxy, and opened a fresh document. An anonymous tip to the Internal Oversight Board. I wasn't emotional. I was exact. I included flagged vendor approvals, unusually expedited payments, and authorization logs with one curious signature, Ryan Delaney's. Just enough data to spark concern, and just enough breadcrumbs to force someone to follow. I set the follow-up for 2 weeks out, right before our quarterly compliance review. Then I leaned back in the dark and closed the laptop. They thought they'd silenced me. What they didn't realize is they'd handed me the blade, and I already knew where every artery was buried. The first time Ryan bungled a contract, he laughed it off. Oops, guess I mixed up the codes. Happens to the best of us, he grinned, but it doesn't. Not to the best of us. Not to those who spent 21 years mapping the bloodstream of Fairgrove's financial system. Every number has a shadow, every dollar a fingerprint. He didn't know that. Worse, he didn't care. And somehow, Ryan still got the conference room's chuckles while I sat beside him, pretending my blood wasn't quietly boiling. He carried himself like a man born for the part. Tailored jacket, $600 watch, a grin straight out of a leadership seminar, and all the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for anything. During meetings, he tossed around buzzwords like synergize, optics, and forward leverage, blissfully unaware of the difference between net income and net cash flow. Still, the heads nodded, some out of loyalty to his father, some out of self-preservation. And I watched, I listened. And I recorded it all, in my mind, in my notes, and in the metadata. He crashed a quarterly vendor payment schedule by manually overriding the payment queue. 3 departments froze their budgets for 5 full days. I fixed it before dawn, scrubbed the logs, sent a quiet message to the ops team to label it a minor system delay. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just another mess hidden behind my silence. Then came the compliance forecast meeting. Ryan was asked to present our European manufacturing risk exposure report, something the auditors were beginning to monitor closely. I had finalized that report myself the night before. My notes, my projections, My risk scoring framework? I had sent him the file for review only, clearly marked. Ryan plugged in his laptop, took a dramatic breath, and said, "My team and I have prepared a detailed forecast outlining key vulnerabilities and suggested mitigation strategies. Slide 3 highlights our exposure map." My words? Exactly. Word for word. I didn't flinch, didn't scan the room, but my jaw tightened. My nails bit into my palms beneath the table. I held still while the room applauded. Then I walked calmly back to my desk, opened the shared drive, and pulled up the original file. I added a timestamp watermark, converted it to a PDF, and quietly emailed it to myself. Subject: for reference, original forecast draft. He could have the applause. I'd take the proof. They thought they'd buried me under condescension and protocol, but I'd learned to thrive in the shadows. And in the shadows, I had seen exactly how much damage Ryan Delaney was doing. Every fix I made behind the scenes twisted a little deeper into my chest. But even the most patient heart has its limits, and mine was nearly spent. The coffee machine wasn't even working that morning. I stood there in the break room, staring at it like I could will it back to life with enough focus. Behind me, his voice cut through the air. "Marin!" Ryan barked from the glass-walled conference room. "2 sugars, and not that bitter brand from yesterday." Once upon a time, people waited for me to walk into a meeting before they started anything serious. I used to sit at the head of that very table, leading quarterly reviews with confidence forged over 2 decades of building Fairgrove's compliance infrastructure from the ground up. Now, I was making instant coffee for a 27-year-old who couldn't navigate a spreadsheet without Google. I found an old electric kettle in the cabinet corner, filled it, boiled the water, and stirred the powdered mix like a temp at a cheap motel. Then I slipped quietly into the room and placed the mug by Ryan's right hand. He didn't even glance up. I stayed in the back, taking notes, printing copies, handing out highlighters. The room didn't see me. The room saw through me. Then came the jab, low and sideways. Someone, mid-conversation, reaching for the packet I had assembled, whispered with a half-smirk, "Guess we know who got the real demotion." Another voice followed, from boardroom boss to breakroom barista. Chuckles. Just a few, but enough. I didn't flinch, just kept my eyes glued to the notepad in front of me. My ears burned, my pen pressed harder, scribbling nonsense across the page. Anything to keep my hands occupied. My throat tightened. I made it through the meeting, but barely. That night, I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing holding me together. I didn't say much during dinner, smiled where I had to, nodded when my daughter explained her science project with paper rockets. Later, while folding laundry on the couch, she came over and handed me a drawing. It was me, standing tall, wearing a cape. In bright marker, it read, "Mom, the smartest woman in the world." I felt my throat clench. If this story stirred something in you, if you found strength in the silence, clarity in the strategy, or a piece of yourself in my journey, consider subscribing to the channel, not just to support stories like mine, but to make sure you're here for what comes next, because this wasn't the end. It was the turning point. And in the next chapter, I'll show you exactly what happens when quiet power is given the freedom to lead, with no restrictions, no cover-ups, and no one left to silence the truth. She looked at me with that piercing honesty only kids possess. "You're not going to let them treat you like you're nothing, right? You always say being quiet doesn't mean being weak." I smiled. Barely. It almost undid me. That night, once she'd fallen asleep, I opened my laptop and started building something that would make sure they'd never forget who I really was. I opened my laptop and began pulling data, backups, contracts, access logs. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but the structure had already started. Brick by brick. They'd stripped me of my title, they'd taken my seat at the table, but what they didn't realize was I built the foundation they were standing on. Then I saw it. A vendor name I didn't recognize. Westmere Solutions, hidden inside a bundled services invoice. The payment stood out immediately, 3 times the standard rate for a vague set of deliverables. The language in the contract was deliberately generic. No performance benchmarks, no service dates, Just vague jargon and inflated billing. The approval? Signed by Ryan Delaney. My chest tightened as I opened the attachment. The listed contact was Logan Price. I remembered the name instantly. Ryan's college roommate, the one who showed up drunk at Fairgrove's corporate holiday mixer last year and made a scene about finally cashing in. This wasn't negligence. It was calculated. I clicked over to our internal reporting system and flagged the transaction under policy code 8C. Potential conflict of interest. I kept my note brief, professional, and clear. Requesting internal hold and escalation pending vendor re-verification. Then I hit send. 20 minutes later, the report vanished. No alert, no email confirmation, no audit trail in the workflow logs. I knew exactly what had happened. Ryan had used his override access, deleted the flag, re-uploaded a cleaner version, buried the evidence under a new document ID, and no one questioned it. Because no one questioned him. He was the CEO's son. That was enough. I sat at my desk, paralyzed. Not with fear, but with a cold, numbing sense of futility. I had done everything by the book, followed the protocol, stayed within policy. And still, the system treated me like I didn't exist. But I wasn't done. I opened a secure terminal and typed in my old credentials, ones I hadn't touched since leading the audit redesign project 3 years ago. Apparently, IT had never revoked my admin-level override. Their mistake. I pulled up the timestamp logs, found the original version, downloaded the deletion history, full metadata, IP trace, and user credentials. Then I encrypted it all, backed it up onto a drive I kept hidden at home, labeled only Westmere Evidence, Matt T. I didn't confront Ryan. I didn't warn him, because I had no intention of stopping him. Not yet. I didn't respond, because the deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't a slip-up. It was a pattern. And if there was one thing I understood after 2 decades in regulatory audits, it was that patterns never stay hidden forever. They unravel, slowly at first, then all at once. So I stayed silent. While they scrambled to cover their tracks, I built a path. And when the time came, I would walk them directly into the fire they lit themselves. By the end of the week, I had constructed a timeline that would make any federal auditor nod in approval. Every doctored document, every missing internal flag, every vendor tied to Ryan Delaney's circle, each one cataloged. It wasn't just the fraud I traced. It was the technique, the methods, font swaps, metadata mismatches, digital signatures that didn't align with login timestamps. It was like watching a tutorial in corporate forgery unfold, clumsy and entitled. He reused templates, recycled language, missed protocol markings. He didn't even bother to mask the file histories, because no one had ever taught him to be careful, and no one ever told him I'd still be watching. I worked late every night, in my home office, with the lights low and blinds drawn tight. No company Wi-Fi. I funneled everything through an encrypted connection, saving files into a nested drive titled Internal Review, Reference Only. Inside that archive were folders. Inside those folders, patterns. Ryan hadn't just rubber-stamped inflated contracts. He'd been reusing templates from an old procurement playbook, slightly altered and redirected to fake vendors. He was sloppy. He thought no one would dig. And he was right. Until... It was nearly 12:30 a.m. on a Wednesday when a new email slipped into my private inbox. No subject, no sender listed. Just a single line. They're watching your logins. Be careful with every step. I froze. Read it again. Then a third time. Someone knew. Not just what I was doing, but how I was doing it. And they didn't report me. They warned me. Could have been a quiet ally in IT. Maybe someone in legal who'd seen the smoke but hadn't found the fire. Or maybe just someone, like me, who was tired of pretending everything was fine. I didn't reply. Just encrypted a copy and hid it in a decoy folder called HR Forms 2019. Then I locked down the system and stood up. I wasn't panicking. I was just getting sharper. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, walked to the window, and stared out at the stillness of early morning. They were watching. Good. Let them watch. Every quiet keystroke I made was one more thread tugged from the fabric they were trying so desperately to hold together. And when the seams gave way, they'd have front row seats to the collapse they helped create. At 7:24 a.m., the email arrived, tucked between vendor updates and generic team memos. Subject line, scheduled external financial audit begins Monday. I read it twice, then a third time. No warning, no whisper. Just a cold, clinical notice sent to the executive leadership chain and copied deliberately to my inbox. A full-scope audit, Q1 through Q3, with specific focus on vendor contracts, offshore payments, and executive-level approvals. It was happening, and they had no idea I was the one who made it happen. Across the hall, a door slammed hard enough to shake the glass. Moments later, I heard Thomas Vance, the CEO, yelling into his phone. "Not the timing I wanted. We need a full file pull." Then louder. "Ryan's the point of contact." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The mug rattled against my fingertips. The room was warm, but my hands were ice. This was it. The moment the storm I had orchestrated finally broke overhead, and though I'd prepared for it, the dread still clung to my skin. Because when you plan a storm, you still have to stand in it when it rains. Ryan didn't speak to me until after lunch. His swagger was gone, replaced by nervous energy and the shallow panic of someone who'd never had to clean up his own mess. We need to get an audit packet together," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Vendor summaries, contract approvals, anything they might want to see." When he finally made eye contact, I saw it. That flicker of fear. He didn't remember what he signed, didn't realize what he'd deleted, and now he was about to be held accountable. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll start this afternoon." By 3:15 p.m., I sat alone in conference room B. Surrounding me, folders, drives, and the cold weight of truth. The real checklist sat in front of me, issued by the audit team. Everything Ryan thought he could fake. And now, I was the one piecing it all together. Every document was a trail of his carelessness. And every detail still had my fingerprints beneath it. He hadn't just buried red flags. He'd torched the entire map and handed it to the board with a smile. But now, the fire was spreading back toward him. At 6 p.m., I loaded the first full audit prep folder onto a clean USB drive and slipped it into my leather bag. Labeled it plainly, Audit Week 1. As I exited the building, I passed Ryan Delaney pacing in the hallway, cell phone tight to his ear, whispering with urgency. When he spotted me, he froze, just for a second, but didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The tension between us said everything, because I knew what was coming, and so did he. By 10:30 a.m. the next morning, I was buried in archived vendor logs, retrieving each file the external auditors had formally requested. One particular folder caught my attention. An old compliance archive I'd built 6 years earlier, accessible only under restricted clearance. It held reports Ryan had likely forgotten even existed. His sloppiness wasn't just in what he approved. It was in what he failed to erase. I worked methodically. Gloves on, encrypted laptop, back channel connection, every keystroke deliberate. Any trace I left could be used against me, especially now that the audit wasn't hypothetical anymore. Then I saw it. A file I hadn't created. Nestled inside the restricted folder, time-stamped 5:42 a.m. It was titled, Policy Breach Report, MAT, my initials. I opened it, and my breath caught. It was a formal HR complaint, confidential, comprehensive, and sinister. It accused me of unauthorized access to sensitive files, tampering with internal data, and intentionally obstructing Ryan's executive oversight. It was detailed, legalistic, worded to sound like truth with just enough poison to discredit me completely. This was no accident. It was a setup, preemptive damage control. Ryan, or maybe Thomas, was preparing to strike first. If I exposed them, they'd bury me harder. Paint me as a rogue, a disgruntled relic acting out. For the first time in weeks, my hands shook. I closed the file, pulled the USB, stepped out of the cold server room into a hallway that suddenly felt too narrow. I needed clarity. That's when I saw Jason, one of the junior IT techs, standing by the printer, manila folder in hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. He gave a slight nod. "I saw your login trail," he said quietly, eyes scanning both ends of the corridor. "The old root folders. Most people don't know they're even still live." I froze. "You're not wrong," he said. "Just be careful. They're watching you now. All of you." Then he turned and walked away. He didn't report me. He confirmed what I feared and gave me silent permission to finish what I started. Back at my desk, I deleted every digital footprint from the Active Directory. Every recent file had already been backed up, every copied version buried under encrypted subfolders across 3 drives. I even reset my remote access credentials, rerouting them through a dormant internal account last used during a discontinued audit pilot. Fiscal year 2022. If they wanted to frame me, they'd need more than a forged document and doctored logs. They'd need to dismantle the truth itself. And the truth? It lived across 3 hidden drives, 4 months of metadata, and a breadcrumb trail buried so deep they didn't even know where to start looking. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was open warfare. And I had no intention of retreating. The auditors arrived on a Tuesday morning, just after 8 a.m. 3 of them in gray suits, holding clipboards and radiating quiet authority. No pleasantries, no posturing. The energy in the office changed in seconds. Conversations dipped, keyboards tapped more carefully. Even Ryan Delaney, usually all grins and buzzwords, kept tugging at his collar, scanning the floor like he was searching for a script no one had written. I'd been assigned to assist the lead auditor, Lindsay Clark, early 40s, sharp features, zero tolerance for noise. We'd crossed paths years earlier during a compliance workshop I ran for Fairgrove's European partners. She didn't acknowledge it. Or maybe she did, with a single, brisk nod. The review began in Ryan's office. Lindsay started with basic protocol questions. He threw around phrases like real-time tracking and cross-verification compliance logs. But even from the hallway, I could hear the tremble in his voice. He was grasping, fast-talking, hoping technical terms could mask a paper trail on fire. By 9:15 a.m., the cracks appeared. Lindsay held up 2 versions of a vendor approval document. One was from the company's official system. The other came from a back-end time-stamped archive. "The signatures match," she said evenly, "but the amounts don't. Original says $75,000. This one, $110,000. Ryan blinked. "Scope change," he stammered. "We updated it." "It's not logged," she said flatly. "No amendment record, no audit trail." She made notes. No reaction. Then came more. Vendors without tax IDs. Wire transfers approved while Ryan was on PTO. Forms bearing his name, referencing compliance codes that were phased out 2 years ago. He tried to blame legacy systems, called it inherited chaos. Lindsay just circled another item on her list. By 11:40 a.m., she requested access to the internal archive. The one I'd built. The one where everything was waiting. She didn't ask me directly. She asked someone in procurement, but when they hesitated, my name came up. "Ms. Trask?" Lindsay said, not unkindly, stepping into the doorway. "Would you be able to assist?" "Of course," I said, already knowing which file would unravel everything. I led her to a drive labeled Quarterly Forecast, Internal Drafts. Inside was a document titled Compliance Gap Projection, Phase 3. She opened it, scanned the opening page, then paused and read a paragraph aloud. "This phrasing feels oddly specific." It was. I had written it 6 months earlier as part of a risk assessment memo that was never published, because Ryan Delaney deleted it before it reached final review. Lindsay looked up. "Do you know who authored this?" I kept my voice level. "I do." Her pen paused mid-note. It was a subtle moment, but I saw it. That near-invisible shift in the air, the slow realignment of credibility. Her eyes said what her lips didn't. Now, this makes sense. She closed her notepad and straightened. "We'll need a complete set of the original forecast documents. This extends beyond the initial scope." Ryan said nothing. His face was pale, mouth slightly open. He looked like a man watching the floor beneath him begin to splinter, and realizing, too late, that he caused it. I turned to leave, the corners of my mouth lifting. Not in joy, but in something more dangerous. Validation. By 4:20 p.m., the audit team had completely overtaken the second floor. Office doors opened and closed in 30-minute intervals. Executives were pulled in, questioned, then released, often looking dazed or defensive. I, on the other hand, moved freely, quietly, calmly, handing off files, plugging in encrypted drives, guiding auditors without attracting attention. Ryan was nowhere to be found. At 5:10 p.m., Thomas Vance's assistant appeared at my desk. Her face was unreadable. "The CEO would like to see you. Conference room 6. No context, no email trail, just a summons. I followed her down the long corridor. Glass walls once filled with reflections of who I used to be, director, team lead, the steady hand behind compliance policy. Those titles were gone now, but what remained was stronger. Vance was alone. The room was dim, lit only by the fading Seattle sun spilling through the window. He didn't stand, just leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You knew this was coming," he said, voice low. "Didn't you?" I met his eyes without flinching. Would it matter if I did? Would it matter if I said yes? He didn't answer. The silence hung between us, heavy and long. Thomas Vance was never the yelling type. His strength had always been in the illusion of control, of being the calmest voice in the room, even when the building was on fire. But that illusion was cracking now, not from anger, from recognition. He had underestimated the wrong person. "I brought you in here," he said finally, "because I need to understand something." His voice was lower now, almost human. "Why didn't you say anything? If you had concerns, you could have come to me." My response was measured, steady. "I did, for years. You stopped listening the moment you hired him." His eyes broke away, shifting toward the window, as if the truth stung more than he expected. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single folder. Neat, tidy, labeled. I placed it on the table in front of him. He stared at it like it might detonate. "What is this?" "A roadmap," I said. "An exact blueprint to restructure your financial compliance systems before the auditors file their final report." He didn't touch it. "Full transparency, new access protocols, vendor recertification, a real internal ethics council. Everything I proposed. Before I was replaced by a last name you liked better." His jaw clenched. But still, he said nothing. I stepped closer, kept my voice calm, controlled. "You have a choice, Thomas. Use it, or let the auditors finish what I started. Either way, the shortcuts you built this house on are already burning. I'm just showing you where the fire exits are." Still, silence. But it wasn't dominance this time. It was surrender. And I didn't need a signature or a nod to know I had just reclaimed the room. Without ever raising my voice, I turned to leave. "You're not staying?" he asked, voice thinner than before. I paused. I already stayed longer than I should have. Then I walked out, leaving him alone with the quiet truth he could no longer deny. By 9 a.m., Monday, the executive wing was silent. Ryan's nameplate was gone, his office cleared. Hurriedly, sloppily. No memo, no announcement, just the gravity of absence, like a collapsed star in a corporate system that used to orbit his charm. The board wasn't angry. They were blindsided. Audit findings cited systemic negligence, forged approvals, leadership failure. Thomas Vance had voluntarily stepped back, a temporary leave wrapped in formality. But everyone knew. The foundation had split wide open. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just packed. Inside my satchel, next to my keys and company badge, was a small matte black USB drive. Nothing flashy. But on it lived the structural backbone of Fairgrove Technologies' entire compliance framework. My framework. The one I had built over 2 decades. Refined, defended, and finally used to expose everything they tried to bury. I walked through the lobby without ceremony. No final all-staff email, no awkward goodbyes. Just the steady click of my heels across polished tile and a quiet nod from the security guard as he held the door open one last time. Outside, the air didn't feel like escape. It felt like release. 21 years. I gave them everything. Loyalty. Nights no one asked for. Weekends no one thanked me for. Silence when they needed it. Solutions when no one else had them. And in return, they gave me a pay cut, a demotion, and a boy with a last name they liked better than mine. But I didn't need a headline. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a corporate press release about integrity and new directions. Because I had the one thing that mattered most, the truth. And now, I had something else too. My freedom. 1 week later, I was sitting at a small table in a quiet corner cafe in downtown Seattle, steam curling off my coffee. The noise of Fairgrove felt 100 miles away. So did the ache in my chest. My phone buzzed. New email from Lindsay Clark. Subject, opportunity. I opened it. We'd like to bring you on as Director of Special Advisory for Internal Investigations, Confidential Cases, Full Independence. Let us know if you're interested. I read it once, then again, a third time, just to be sure. And then I smiled. Not wide, not smug, just enough. Because I no longer needed a corner office or a nameplate carved into frosted glass. I didn't need to lead a morning stand-up or stay late fixing someone else's shortcut. I had already proven that real power doesn't yell. It builds. It documents. It waits. And when the time is right, it walks away with everything that matters. No grand exit, no fanfare, just a clean slate, and the kind of quiet peace you only earn when you've stood up, silently, and won. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. Truly. Because I didn't just tell it to settle a score. I told it for anyone who's ever been pushed aside, overlooked, or made to feel small in a room they helped build. Maybe you've been there. Watching someone less qualified get the credit, staying quiet in meetings because speaking up came with a cost, cleaning up mistakes behind the scenes while someone else smiled in the spotlight. If that sounds familiar, leave a comment. Tell me your story, or tell me what you would have done in my shoes. And if this hit home, if any part of you whispered, "That could have been me," then please, hit the like button so others can find it too. Here's the truth I learned. Silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's the most strategic move you can make. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a battle. It's a blueprint. So if you're dealing with injustice right now, whether at work, at home, or in your community, document everything. Keep your dignity. And know this, real power doesn't need a stage. It lives in quiet preparation, in proof, and in patience. I didn't scream. I didn't fight dirty. I just told the truth and let the facts walk the rest of the way. If you're building your own comeback, I see you. And if you believe in stories like mine, ones about quiet strength and earned justice, subscribe to the channel. I've got more stories to share, and I promise you, they're just getting started. We rise, quietly, but we rise.